Hello, people. Welcome to today's video where we will be discussing, can Hegel ever be wrong?
Yes, I think from listening to us, you might get the impression that Hegel may very well never be wrong.
Yes, Hegel's word is more sacred than the Pope's word.
But of course, that's not the case because Hegel talks about a lot of concepts that you might think are historically contingent, and maybe Hegel was wrong about what he thought about them, or maybe he was wrong to ascribe to them the significance that he thought. Uh, but also, later on in this video, Philip is going to take us through a more subtle logical analysis of maybe a mistake that Hegel might have made in the science of logic. So not just a historical contingency, but an error of logical necessity.
So stay tuned.
So stay until the end for that.
Well, we'll start easy, but then we'll ramp up temperature and things will get more and more technical as we proceed.
Yeah. So we can maybe start off with maybe some more obvious things that people nowadays might think Hegel got wrong. So Philip, do you want to start us off with some of those possibilities?
So a few things that come to mind is the structure of the family. So Hegel has a very sort of traditional view of the family, husband and wife, and and they are meant to produce offspring and form the building block of society, of the state. But as we've come to see in our day and age, there are many different ways one can approach this concept, this way of being, and that may work very differently, but equally good. And so, does Hegel's account of the family need to be revised? Is there something in, the way it's being expressed that's wrong, or is his logic about it, completely off? That's some one thing that we can point to. The other thing is the structure or the political organization, and he thought that constitutional monarchy was superior. And there has to be a monarch in it. So right, so that's another thing that you can think about and analyze in terms of the states that have come after Hegel and emerged, some that are not monarchies but republics that seem to function fine or perhaps even better. So we can say a few words about those things. So do you have anything to add, Ellis, to those?
Yeah, I think in our modern age, at least in Great Britain, though I think this is quite common across the West, there is a general decline in religious affiliation.
Mm.
People seem to be less religiously inclined. Um, and of course, religion plays a pretty integral role in Hegel's concept of absolute spirit. In Absolute Spirit, which is one of the final chapters in Hegel's third book of the Encyclopedia, you get three stages of absolute spirit. You get art, religion, and philosophy. And each of these different forms express a different way of expressing the concept or the idea. And it's, I think it's pretty widely accepted that religion is integral to Hegel's system. And Hegel clearly thinks that religion plays an important role. There is something about representational thinking, which is the form of thinking that he ascribes to religious thought. There is something about representational thinking that is crucial to human beings, to the state, to all the things that he thinks are important in society. But clearly, society, or at least Western society, or parts of Western society, whichever place you're in, seems to be moving in a different direction. So is Hegel right about that? Is Hegel making is Hegel's point again historically contingent? Is it a logical error? Uh, what would it mean for religion to no longer be necessary when it comes to spirits?
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
a pretty I think even if you're not Hegelian, that's a pretty big question. People, discuss the moral or psychological implications of the decline of religion. So I think that could be a pretty interesting topic that where one could spend some time thinking about whether Hegel was wrong about it.
Mm. Yeah. Maybe to say, elaborate a little bit on the whole spirit thing. So for Hegel, the human being has certain necessities in virtue of being a self-conscious being. And that quite classically, like going back all the way to Aristotle, the human being desires to know. What they desire most to know, or perhaps need to know, is about themselves, in addition to their own place in reality. They have to figure out their own reality, their own reality making um, sort of consciousness. And Hegel gives a systematic treatise or an account of what he thinks are all the different dimensions to human self-conscious activity. And one of those is politics, another is being ethical, another one is being moral. But then there are sort of higher ones, which he terms as absolute, which means, which, as Ahilleas was saying, they are the concern art, so aesthetic experiences, and being sort of religious, having religious experiences. And then finally, philosophical truths, truths about how things work, logically and so on. And in concrete reality, everyday situations, these are more or less intermingled, right? They overlap. You will never find really one completely devoid of the other. But the way Hegel thinks about things is he distills out the essences of these things that are concrete in reality, and he's able to think of them in more precise determinations. And what I think makes absolute spirit stand out is that the object is not really something out there. What's important about that object is not that it's out there, but that it is within us. So
Mm.
the thing about aesthetic, religious, and philosophical experiences is that we are apprehending something that is looks like it's outside of us, but it is really within us as social self-conscious beings, not just as something individual, a private experience, but something that is fundamentally shareable, something fundamentally part of mind as such. So just wanted to add a little caveat there in case people were like, what is he on about? And spirit, what is this thing? It's like what in English we call the humanities, but Germans are just better at using that term in a more natural way.
Yeah. Now, of course, another very famous thing that Hegel is allegedly wrong about is evolution. Um, Now, that's a slightly misleading because when Hegel wrote the last uh, edition of the encyclopedia, which was 1830 or 31, if I'm not mistaken, 1830, I think. Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, which is the theory of evolution that is currently sort of used, wasn't available, at least for another 30 odd years, I think. So Hegel is, when he's thinking about evolution, he's thinking about theorists like Buffon and 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 other more general theories like what was it? Embryonism, where basically all of us are sort of fully formed inside the eggs and we sort of expand in this really creepy way.
Just get bigger.
Yeah. So when Hegel is critiquing evolution in the philosophy of nature, which is where you get the main critique of evolution, he's critiquing something that he's critiquing a kind of evolution that which is different to what we're thinking about when we do it. So it's a bit of a misnomer to say that Hegel criticizes or is against evolution.
Mm.
Um, and our old professor Stephen Holgate has written and has spoken quite a bit about this topic, and he's quite keen to sort of to vindicate Hegel in this and say that Hegel, had he known about Darwin's theory of evolution, would have agreed with it and well, agreed with it philosophically, and perhaps even accommodated it into his philosophy of nature.
Hmm.
Philip, your thoughts on this?
I thought that he would, like Hegel, the person, would disagree with Darwin style-esque evolution, but that his system could be go beyond that such that um, yeah, so the Hegelian system kind of would be compatible with it. But just before we continue on the topic of evolution, just want to make a final point about religion.
Okay, sure.
Sorry for backtracking,
Yeah.
but just quickly. Um, Now we can think about the decline of religion in West, whether that is a decline fundamentally of religious form or of content. Because we can talk about Christianity, the church, and so on and so forth, but then there might be the religious form. So having sort of religious knowledge, thinking of terms in sort of global universal terms, that hasn't vanished or is in decline. That is, you might say, is still thriving, but that the object of religion might be different. So you could sort of slice it differently,
Hmm.
because as we were saying, Hegel thinks that religion is necessary in self-conscious
Yeah.
uh, human activity. Now, in which way is it necessary? As the sort of Christian or Islamic, what have you, church, or as this religious form of knowledge? So, um, just
Yeah.
that or
Right.
feel good.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay, now we can go back to evolution, which might be, take be a religious object.
Right. Of course. Yes. Well, I think um, we'll never know what Hegel would have done had he been aware of Darwin's theory of evolution. Um,
No, but a system is there for us to sort of pick it
but
up.
exactly, the system is there for us. Now, Hegel does make a general criticism in the philosophy of nature about a system of thought whereby the logical progression of concepts is explained through material progression.
Hmm.
In other words, let's say we've got concept plant, animal, two different concepts, plant and animal. Uh, and for Hegel, these are philosophical concepts.
Hmm.
And he gives, let's say, a logical explanation, a philosophical explanation for why one develops into the other. If a, a scientist, in this case a biologist, provided a materialist explanation for the development of plant into animal, Hegel would not consider that to be as valid or valid in explaining the development from plant to animal, because Hegel puts priority on the philosophical explanation, the logical explanation, which is bound up with the material, with the real, right? I mean, it's not just an idealist explanation. It's well, now we're getting into very murky waters, but it's a materialist idealist explanation, let's say, something like
Uh-huh.
that. But uh, Hegel's system could be seen as an evolutionary system in a way, right? A development of concepts that sort of retain prior concepts and use them to build on themselves and create newer concepts and so on and so forth, which sounds a lot
Yeah,
like evolution.
yeah.
And I think it's that kind of more formalist thought about how Hegel's system works that makes some people think that evolution could be accommodated into the system.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not convinced that makes sense for Hegel's philosophy, but that's a huge topic,
Yeah,
and yeah, and there's no need, I think, to for us to go into it. We can maybe do a video just on this topic and
yeah.
really deep dive into Hegel and evolution.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, if people are interested, then we could consider doing that.
Because I think there's also this bizarre misunderstanding that if Hegel doesn't accommodate evolution in his system, then he somehow thinks that evolution is an invalid scientific theory.
Right.
And of course, the two are can be mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
Uh, Evolution can be perfectly valid as a scientific theory and not find space in Hegel's development philosophy of nature,
Right.
and that's fine. Um, that requires some explanation, I think, to be fair,
Yeah.
because it's a pretty big theory
Yeah.
in
The human
biology.
theory, like all of life, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
all of life. Um, but yeah, Hegel is not either you think Hegel thinks evolution is dog shit, or you think it's correct. There are shades of gray
Hmm.
uh, where it can be made sense of within Hegel's system.
Yeah. Uh, it is really, as you say, Hegel's systematic thinking or like the developmental thinking really looks like evolutionary thinking, but for concepts, for
Yeah,
ideas instead of living material beings.
yeah.
Um, so you would think there would be affinity there, right?
Mm. Hmm.
But then again, what's important with Hegel's philosophical development is that it emerges sort of logically. It emerges in the account. And the thing about material reality is that things bump up against each other a lot, right? You are in an ecosystem constrained by certain resources and so on. And so that forces you and pushes you certain ways, right? So there's a lot of external determination involved. And there's no external determination fundamentally in metaphysics, as Hegel was kind of laying it out. However, metaphysics does speak about what it means to be determined from the outside, right? This is part of also figuring out being determined externally and how that affects your being, right? And how you respond to that, because it's not just a one-way street. It's not just cause and effect. The two are sort of causing and affecting each other as they cause and effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So exactly. So any conception of evolution within a Hegelian framework would actually just be I think it would. It sounds very easy and straightforward, but it would involve a whole host of metaphysical baggage along with it that your average biologist wouldn't be thinking about. And maybe fair enough, that's not their business to do that. But I'm not aware of anyone actually who spent time figuring out how a theory of evolution would work in Hegel's philosophy. There are lots of people that comment on it and try to, give an opinion on what they think uh, could be done with evolution, Hegel's philosophy.
Yeah.
But I'm not aware of anyone who's actually spent time and dedicated time thinking through these implications. And I think it would look very, very different.
Mm.
There is an excellent book by Richard Lewontin. I never knew how to pronounce his surname, called The Dialectical Biologist.
Hmm.
And he's a biologist by training. And he's clearly read a lot of Hegel.
Hmm.
And he wrote this excellent book where he's sort of trying to bring in dialectic, maybe in the spurious way that we were talking about last time, but nevertheless, into modern biology.
Right.
But I don't think he talks about evolution either.
Okay.
So I think it's definitely something that we should think about doing.
Hmm.
Shall we move on to the science of logic?
Yeah, let's do that. So the perhaps the most pertinent area
Hmm.
that Hegel could be wrong in the more direct and damning way is in the metaphysics, because that kind of underpins the whole rest of the system. Not to say that it couldn't be remedied, but before we proceed, you and me, Ahilleas, plenty of philosophers do criticize Hegel and think he's on the wrong track, like Deleuze, um, Sartre to some extent, Marx, Kierkegaard. So there are plenty of critics and Schelling, right? There are many people who think Hegel is just like obscure or doesn't make sense or just plain wrong or incoherent.
Yeah.
Bertrand Russell. The names keep coming, right? Once you think a little bit. So
Feuerbach.
yeah. But what we are interested in is because the problem with all of these critics is they don't take on Hegel's project.
Yeah.
So they don't critique Hegel from within Hegel, which is the standard Hegel sets for himself and for any kind of critique. It's like you got to critique something from within the premises of that position. If you come with your own standards and your own information and your own knowledge, and then you say, well, it's not so and so because of I have this idea or whatever,
Hmm.
it's not fair. It's an external critique. That position doesn't have available these resources which you have, so it's not fair. So what we're interested in is figuring out, critiquing Hegel within Hegel, using Hegel to critique Hegel.
Yeah, an imminent critique.
Indeed. Um,
And I believe you have in your current work, you have stumbled upon an error or a logical error in Hegel's thought, right?
well, I think something in the movement can kind of be improved. So here, this is an article on our sPhil encyclopedia that we're building. This is the process, how it looks like. It's open source. It's all on GitHub for people who know what that is. But it's basically like a code base platform for programmers to sort of manage their work, which is a lot of time just text. And this is what we're doing as well. And this is an article on the development of something. It's a category in science and logic. So this is still a draft. But at some point, I have like a section that's more in my own voice and not so much in sort of speaking on the part on behalf of Hegel, but it's still taking sourcing it from Hegel, right? And that is to do with the development of the other. So in the category something, there's another category that emerges, which is other. So something and other, right? And the way it appears in the logic, I think, doesn't quite make sense and potentially is incoherent. You suddenly get a lot of things happening that may look like as if Hegel stops being presuppositions, which he usually is very good at avoiding. Um, and I propose a different alternative that avoids what I think are the pitfalls and just like a kind of correction. But I think that there is a point where Hegel might be wrong. What do you think it is?
Yeah. I think without getting into the details of this, just sort of thinking about what you've done on a sort of formal methodological level, um, your approach has been to try to think with Hegel and to see what is motivating Hegel's thought about the development of something and other,
Mhm.
and trying to make sure that the reasons that Hegel gives for a certain logical development are coherent,
Oh, yeah,
right?
yeah,
Which is what which is what you want to do when you want to try and understand Hegel in his own terms. And I think that's what's really important about this project, about sPhil, the encyclopedia, because Hegel can be so daunting, it can be so difficult to engage with Hegel that sort of breaking it down in these chapters as we've done and providing, you know, an in-depth account of each of these sections helps to bear out the text and to pay special attention to each of these sections or subsections. So I think the fact that, you know, through writing your article or something or other that you've come up with, that you've sort of discerned what may be an error, I think that in itself is really interesting, and it sort of showcases the whole point of this encyclopedia that we are trying to that we're fundamentally interested in what the Hegelian project promises, and we want to make sure that it delivers on those promises.
Yeah,
And if there's a mistake, there's a mistake. We have to address it. We have to, see if it's solvable and try to move forward from that.
yeah. It was really like a philosophical project. I mean, we're
Yeah.
interested in the truth, plain and simple, right? And we think that Hegel provides very compelling and powerful arguments, but at some points, those arguments become questionable,
Yeah.
become vague, become unclear, become perhaps incoherent. Um, and I think I've spotted something here. Might be wrong, but this is still being drafted, still working on it, and I think it's fair game, right? As long as we're sort of doing an imminent critique, which is what Hegel is doing to others, we are improving on the overall system, which is what we want to do, right? This
Absolutely.
isn't just for Hegel, by and for Hegel. It's by and for us every time we think it.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, so you can read more in detail here if you want. We won't go through the details here, but you can sort of see on the screen what roughly what it's about. Um, and that is kind of like Hegel's evoking a category from previously, which is becoming in the move that doesn't involve becoming, but then he changes the moments of becoming, which like the moments of becoming are being in nothing. Why is suddenly becoming having different moments? And how does that change becoming as such, right? So I find it becomes a little bit problematic.
Yeah.
But that showcases that, yeah, there is still work to be done here. Hegel's project is alive and well.
Yeah. I mean, there are lots of times when I'm working on a chapter and Hegel will move so quickly from one moment to the other that you can't really figure out the motivation for a move. And a lot of the work is trying to think through those moments and trying to provide a logical scenario for why the move from A to B is necessary. Hegel is not perfect. He's, in the middle of writing an 840-page book, there are going to be a few places where, his pen slips a bit and he just wants to go to sleep.
Just want to get it done. To
Yeah.
be fair, it is remarkably extremely good, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's why we keep working at it and we are compelled by it.
Yeah.
Uh, and often Hegel is just cryptic and it needs a little bit more explanation, but we can figure it out. But at some points, we just can't come up with a way that accords with the way Hegel puts the development. And so we have to think, well, what is our alternatives here?
Yeah.
Right.
So I think, people should really get involved with the encyclopedia just with this point in mind that the more eyes you get on a text, the more critical eyes you get on it, the more you can hope to, discern whether it's coherent or not. And this takes me back to our very first video on sPhil, where we were sort of talking about wanting to work towards what was the word we used now? I forget.
That's this?
Yes, consensus building,
Yeah.
and this is how you go about it. So yeah, really good work there.
Thanks. Thanks, Ahilleas.
Yeah.
Appreciate your feedback and comments.
Yeah, well, I look forward to seeing the article published.
Me too.
Yeah.
Right then. We hope that gives you some ideas and some taste for what can be done here in the Hegelian world.
And if there was anything that we talked about that you'd like to hear more about, do let us know, and we'll try to prioritize it in our next videos.
Yeah. Right then. Thank you and have a lovely day.
Thank you very much. Good night.